Hey, what's up guys? Tim Uchuk from Simplify to Multiply. I hope you're having an awesome day wherever you are. I'm just on my way to work here. And we have, what are we at here? We have about just over 3 weeks left in the quarter. So quarter ends June 30th here for us. And for those of you that don't know, I live in and work in seasons. And what I mean by that is I like to plan and do everything around 3-month increments for a couple of reasons. First of all, it allows me to make realistic short-term goals, and 3 months it's kind of like the perfect window. It's not too long. It's like the Goldilocks time. It's not too long and it's not too short. So you've got kind of enough time to ramp up and start, plan, and complete a project without circumstances changing so much, because if you look at like 12 months, for example, it's too long. Half a year is too long. There's just way too many factors that change. And so you're going to be kind of, you're going to be adapting a little bit too much to changing circumstances if it's too long. And it gives you something kind of short term that you can shoot for as well. So June 30th is the end of the second quarter already, so it's going by super quick. And so we do, within those quarters, a couple different like rituals. And what I like to call them, and they're basically like milestones. And I like to use the analogy of like a cruise ship, right? So if you look at like a business or your life, you might have a massively transformative purpose is a common acronym that's used, or a mission statement. And that's essentially like your North Star. That is where you're facing to create your kind of big impact and create a life and filled with fulfillment, right? And so the analogy is like, this is your if you're driving a cruise ship, for example, that's your destination, and that's where you're kind of setting your coordinates towards. And then every quarter there are milestones or checkpoints just to make sure that you're making steady progress. Now, one thing I just want to quickly talk about the importance of doing things in this way is Dan Sullivan refers to something, and this is where a lot of entrepreneurs kind of get stuck, and that's called or referred to as the gap. Now, the gap is the difference in your mind. It's a mental idea. It's a mental construct of this notion of you comparing yourself to perfection. And the metaphor that he uses is the horizon. So if you're comparing yourself to something that's like perfect, in other words, the horizon, you're always going to feel let down because it's an illusion. It's not possible to get to the horizon because it's always going to be further away. So what he says instead is that we should measure by looking backwards, or in other words, measure by looking at our progress. So every quarter, as an example, you have your targets, you stop at the end of the quarter, and you look back. You look back at your progress, and you think about what went well, where was there room for improvement, and how can I make the next quarter better? And he makes this even an easier and more rewarding exercise, because there's this framework where, and this is, I've talked about this before, so fast thinking and slow thinking. So that's what I mean by that is short-term thinking and long-term thinking. So if you were to look at your like a 25-year picture, well, 25 years divides into 100 quarters. So if you look at it that way, there's not as much pressure. Every quarter equals 1%, and so you've got the freedom and space to have a do-over. But at the same time, you're trying to ratchet up every single quarter. So that's what I mean, and that's why I work in seasons and quarters. And so how I've kind of constructed it with our businesses. So we've got 5 businesses, and I don't create projects. They're more like mini contracts. Okay, and this notion of mini contracts comes from my past life in manufacturing, where I learned how to use this system, which is known as, there's many terms. It can be called extreme manufacturing or Scrum or Agile, many terms for it. But essentially what you're doing is you create these, it's called contract first design. And a good example of that is it's these agreements that if they're in place, then you can call the project done, if that makes sense. So Volvo, for example, and car manufacturers use this, John Deere as well, so that if you've got two different parts or modules, so picture like a car divided into three sections if you take the shell of the car off, and those sections have to connect together, right? And so if you're a car manufacturer and you've got multiple different models of car, if you can have contract first design, in other words, they link up, there's a universal connection point between those parts, then you can have kind of infinite designs as long as there's that contract in place that the two sides meet up, like a puzzle kind of. Think of a puzzle. So that's contract first design in the manufacturing design world. And it's the same with, if you look at Tesla or Elon Musk, he's utilized contract first design and first principles to achieve the outrageous success that he has. And this becomes critically important, especially if you're in a world like Elon's, where it's highly competitive and it's highly, he's breaking a lot of ground, a lot of trails that haven't been there before. And that's why it's useful from his standpoint. If you think about first principles, he'll look at, for example, with Tesla. So I drive a Tesla, and it's a pretty amazing experience. But if you look at the battery, he was looking at available batteries on the market before he started the Tesla electric car company. And with the current batteries on the market, he didn't have a business model in place. So what he did through first principles was he looked at, okay, what are all the materials that go into making a battery? And so he looked at each independently on if you were to purchase that material on the market. And so that was just the straight cost of all the independent materials for the batteries. And he said, here's like, with a little bit of input cost, here's like what is possible. And it was like hundreds of times cheaper than the current price of batteries. And so that was his target through first principles. He proved that, with some input costs and some automation, robotics, and so on, some efficiencies, we can at least 10x or shave off by like a tenth the current price of batteries. So we looked at it that way to throw out the challenge, and by doing it through kind of the scientific method, first principles, that enables him and gives him the confidence to kind of push through all of the naysayers. So that's first principles thinking, where you look at what is possible, like what is physically possible, and then work backwards and build your targets around that. And so that's one thing, is looking at kind of the ideal outcome, proving that it's possible, and then reverse engineering it. So he did that. And then he would have reverse engineered it back, and he said, okay, we know that we could probably get at least 10 times savings, right, on these batteries because of science. And then he would have worked back, and he said, through sprints, they would have carved out likely a quarter or some short time period where they wanted to see what was possible with the current state to move it forward towards achieving that. And so the same in our businesses is we've got like these big targets that we want to hit, and then all we do every quarter is we form a bunch of mini contracts, which I'm going to share a link to this in the resources as well. But it's essentially, and we use Trello to manage this stuff, but it's like a project, so it's got a title. So if it was a wedding, it would be Tony and Tina's wedding, so it's got a title. And then you put in the purpose and the importance so everybody understands why you're working on it. And then key results, which are like broken, these are acceptance tests. Yes or no statements to say whether or not the crucial things have been done. So for example, in your business, let's say that you had a startup and within a quarter you wanted to get some sales. Well, one of the key results or acceptance tests might be, 20 new customers or 20 sales, something like that. So that's very clear, it's very black and white, and you want to eliminate the abstract wherever possible and make these black and white acceptance tests. And I like to focus on no more than 5 so that you can really nail them over the course of 3 months. So I just wanted to talk about that. We're kind of looking at the home stretch here in our mini contracts for the quarter for our businesses, and we're looking at, there's a couple remaining key results. So we're going to be focusing on those and finding how can we get those done by the end of the quarter. And so everybody's going to be kind of scrambling and getting kind of creative. But I think we've got a pretty good chance of getting them done. But I hope that's helpful. If you're not living in kind of seasons, it's useful because, it gives you something to look forward to. It allows you to break things down into concrete, tangible items. And it allows you to, avoid procrastination and get kind of real about your goals, what's possible, and hold yourself accountable to them. So if you're not doing it already, highly recommend it. I'm going to be sharing a tool in the resources as well, so you can see what I mean by creating these contracts. And otherwise, hope that's helpful, guys. And I am at the office now, so I hope you guys have an awesome day, and we'll talk to you soon.